All right, so next slide, please. So an important part of the journey of becoming a person-centered organization is really engaging in a critical self-examination of your structure. It's one thing to do the training and to share the values, but if your system ends up placing barriers, people end up not being able to have the life it is that they want. And so we've taken a hard look throughout our service system at what are our processes, what are our systems, what are our policies, and how do we support this, and where are we getting in the way of it. Good example of that is our intake system. And I think, we're talking about DDA here and the work we're doing in our developmental disabilities intake system, but we're having the same conversation throughout our long-term services and support system in DC. And what we found is that people come to us often when they're in crisis, when they need a service. Nobody comes to the state because things are going well in their life. And then what we do is we start talking to them about eligibility. And that means that it can take months from the time they pick up the phone and they call us because they need some support until they've gotten through our eligibility process and we've matched them to a waiver service. And in the meantime, they're hanging out there. The other thing that happens is we start asking them those eligibility-based, deficit-based questions. Prove to us that you're disabled enough to get our services. And so we wanted to really reframe the front door to long-term services and supports in the district. We decided to do it first at our Developmental Disabilities Administration because we were further along the pathway to person-centered thinking, but we're treating it as a pilot for the rest of our long-term services and supports and are hoping to start spinning it out next year and beyond throughout the rest of the system. And so what we did was we created essentially a guided conversation that changes the conversation when a family calls or a person with a disability calls. The very first thing we do now when somebody calls, and I'll be honest, this is starting in September. A lot of this is very much a work in progress. So starting next month, when somebody picks up the phone and calls, part of what we'll be talking about, instead of how disabled are you, is what do people like and admire about you. We're going to start with a strength-based assessment. That'll be the first thing we're doing. Next, we'll use the person-centered thinking, working and not working tool to identify what's going well in the person's long-term services and supports and where are their gaps and service needs that have to be dealt with. Why are they calling? Based on that, we're going to start problem solving with the person right away in that first encounter and looking at what community-based resources are out there that can get them help immediately. Once we've done that, we'll look at whether or not the person actually needs to go through public eligibility for supports. If they do, of course, we'll do that application with them. But all of that information we've gathered in that kind of mini person-centered plan feeds directly into their initial individual support plan, their ISP, at DDA, and also will match into whatever service system. If we end up referring them to behavioral health, with their permission, we'll be able to share the initial person-centered plan. And so when they get to the agency, it's not like they're starting over, but they'll come with a bank of information about them, about their support needs, and about what other community organizations we've already been able to connect them with. One of the things we're doing that'll help build some structure around that is that through the No Wrong Door grant, we're building a comprehensive resource portal that'll help make it easy to match people with community-based resources. And actually, in terms of this braiding of projects, our Supporting Families community of practice has been heavily engaged in our No Wrong Door project. And one of the things they did when they heard we were doing a resource portal was they spent a day identifying the resources that they wish they knew about at different stages in the life course. So when their kid was young, what was the place that either they found that was really helpful for them or that they found out about later and wish they knew? And so they gave us all of this information about different resources, and we've then entered that into our city's 211 system so that it's embedded with information that have come from other families of people with disabilities across the lifespan in terms of what they found helpful. And that'll all feed into our resource portal. Next slide. For service planning as well, we've really taken person-centered thinking tools and skills and made them the foundation of our planning process with people. For each person we support, we use at least 4 person-centered thinking tools to reflect on what's important to and for them, what a good day looks like, who's in their circle of support, and more. The other thing we've done is create a series of guided conversations that our service coordinators have with every person in our system to talk about interest in employment and about community integration. You know, for too long in our field, people have been asked if they want to work. And when they say no, we move them to a day program and stop the conversation. And so we've made some significant changes to that. And now when somebody says they don't want to work, we start exploring those barriers with them. The first thing we ask is, why not? And we say, well, would you like to earn some money? You know, or what are you doing now that you're proud of? What would you like to do more of? And so we keep kind of pushing a little bit and trying to delve into those barriers and see if there are things that we're able to address. And based on those person-centered thinking tools and the guided conversations, for every person in our system, we create customized employment discovery positive personal profiles, which are essentially vocational evaluations for people with significant disabilities. Combined, the person-centered planning tools and the discovery tools result in ISP goals that really reflects people's interests, their preferences, their support needs, and their aim to balance what's important to and for the person. All of our ISPs must include goals for employment and community integration. So even if somebody after that guided conversation says, you know, I'm still not ready to work, we'll work with them on a goal around discovery or a goal around managing money or something that's intended to push them further on a pathway towards employment and community integration. The plans to support people to achieve their goals have to tie directly back as well. And so the individual service plans result in individual schedules for programs and for day programs that have to reflect the person-centered thinking tools, the discovery tools, all of that has to be reflected in what we see happening for people throughout the day. Okay, next slide. The other thing we've done is start to incorporate, and this is, we've started this, we're working on bigger revisions to our ISP that'll come out in October. We already have some of these principles embedded in our current model, is to use the LifeCourse framework to start thinking about bigger picture life goals for people. So if you go to the next slide, this is a tool called the LifeCourse Trajectory, and it helps people identify their long-term goals. I sort of think about it as the North Star of your ISP. And Stephen's going to share his trajectory with us later. But the idea behind the trajectory is everybody wants to have a good life, and everybody defines a good life in their own way. And this tool lets you to take a step back and think not about what do I want to do this year, which is what so many service plans do, but really refocuses you on what is it that the person wants to have happen in their life overall? And how do we make sure that support goals are focused so that they're getting them there? Maybe not this year. There are some long-term goals that it'll take a long time for all of us to reach. But everything we should be doing should be supporting the person's vision for a good life. Most people also know what it is that they don't want, right? I mean, people know that they don't want to be isolated. They don't want to live in poverty. They don't want maybe to live with their family for the rest of their life. They want to be independent. And so, you know, having that conversation starts your planning process in a different way. And, you know, the space around the arrows, some folks use them, some don't. But what you can do is start to list off what are the things that are helping you get to your vision of a good life. And, you know, what's getting you away from there. And to the extent your services and supports are taking you away from your vision, then they don't really belong in your service plan. And we know that it's time to start making changes. Next slide. The next slide is the integrated support star, and we're using this both at intake and in our planning process with the idea that everybody needs support to have a good life. And the more combination and variety and diversity of the kind of supports you have is going to make it more likely that you have an inclusive, quality community life. And so this tool, it's really a problem-solving tool. It helps people brainstorm and think about what supports do they already have that are working for them, and where do they maybe need some additional support and partnership so they can achieve their vision for a good life. So we're using these tools to help match people to a range of diverse community-based supports. Obviously, it'll be well supported by the No Wrong Door resource portal. We're also, in our October ISP, when it goes live, as we go through goals with people, for each goal, we're working through the integrated support stars so that you only end up with a disability-specific service if it's the only thing that will work to help you achieve your goal. And so we're following the model that I think a couple of states, I think Tennessee is one of them, has done, where you start to use just to think about waiver utilization. And so it's not so easy to just match a need to a waiver service, but you really do have to look out into the community to see what's available to support the person. Next slide. Next slide, please. So families, right? Families can be our greatest cheerleaders for person-centered thinking change. They can be our strongest advocates, and they can also be pretty big barriers to systems change. We haven't brought them along. And so we wanted to make sure as we undertook transforming our DD system that we were working closely with the people we supported and their families, and that we were guided by their experience and what they knew. And so as Laura said, when we started our Supporting Families Community of Practice, we were early in our person-centered thinking initiative, and we thought it was important that families develop the same understanding we did and our staff and our providers were about what person-centered thinking was all about. So we really spent the entire first year of our Supporting Families Community of Practice doing person-centered thinking work with families. And maybe the most amazing thing about that to me, as the kind of project director for that, was seeing the change in the conversation. We went from a conversation that was pretty deficit-based and very service-driven to a group of families who are now talking about wanting long-term services and supports that have high expectations for their families, that support employment. You know, we really managed to reframe vision as we started talking about what was possible rather than what currently existed in our long-term service and support system. And through person-centered thinking, that's, as Laura said, what we use to guide what are the system reform efforts we need to help you achieve the dream for you and your family member about the kind of life you want. So we started by bringing in consultants who were family planning together trainers, but at the same time we trained 4 family members, and we ended up training 2 people on our staff, somebody at our UCET, our University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and somebody at one of our advocacy organizations. We actually wanted to train just sort of everyday family members, but to become a family planning together trainer takes 16 full days plus practice days to get certified. And so that's one of the barriers we're struggling with now as we want to look at how do you bring this to scale is it's a very big volunteer commitment. And so how do we turn that into jobs for family members is one of the next challenges in our system. So we trained people in the Family Planning Together curriculum. They were people who were already part of the Supporting Families Community of Practice and were learning about the LifeCourse framework. And last year, those trainers said, we really think these should be combined. We believe that this should be braided, and it should also include supported decision-making, and we should be talking about cultural competency. One of the great things about being in DC is everybody's local, right? And so we got support from the National Center for Cultural Competency and the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making to develop a curriculum for families that really blends all of those things together. We did our pilot. We finished it up about a month ago. We worked with 25 family members. We did 4 full-day sessions that were done simultaneously in English and Spanish, where we worked with new sets of families and we talked about person-centered thinking. We called it Back to the Basics, thinking about a good life for our families. And we really talked about what is person-centered thinking? You know, what's a vision for a good life? How does that involve both the person with a disability and their family having a good life, rather than somebody either always being the caretaker? We talked a lot about impact of culture, and in many ways, that was one of the things that brought the group closest together. It was a very diverse group of people, but they realized they all had all these commonalities once we started talking about culture. And we talked a lot, too, about supported decision-making and how important that is as part of helping people become independent, to make sure that we were supporting that and putting pieces in place. So right now we're in the phase with that pilot where we're doing two things. One is individual follow-up with all 25 members, where we're going to do coaching and so like a kind of one-day technical assistance follow-up to see have families used what they're learning. You know, what else is it that they need to be successful, or there's some things we can help them with, and also get some one-on-one feedback about what worked and didn't work for that training so that we can revise it and kind of make it our new training. The other thing we're doing is working with our DC NAMI chapter and the Department of Behavioral Health to get the sense of, will this work for families of people with behavioral health issues? You know, is it the same training, or is there something that's different? I mean, my sense is, person-centered thinking works for people, you know, and it's really just about the stories that you share. I don't think there's anything unique about this for a DD population, but we do want to work with our experts from behavioral health before we take it out to their families. So that's what we're doing next there. Next slide. So in addition to, you know, kind of all of the training and some of the changes we made, the home and community-based settings rule gave us a real opportunity to advance systems change. The rule required that we, in all states, as you know, conduct a systemic level state assessment of like our entire system, right? Like our IT system, every rule, every policy, every practice, kind of everything we were doing to see whether or not it complied with the requirements of the rule. Where was it silent? Where was it positive? Where did we need to make changes? And so we decided if we were going to do that kind of effort, we were going to do it with help. We were going to bring in the community. And we included several of our person-centered thinking trainers and coaches as part of that. But we would, at the same time, do a systemic look at whether or not all of our system was supporting person-centered thinking and employment first. So as long as we were all in a room and we were all looking at this, how could we do this? And how can we become a better person-centered system? And so after the review, we made a series of changes both to our waiver, and we changed actually almost every single one of our waiver regulations to infuse person-centered thinking in them. And so our service definitions and our scopes of activity emphasize community exploration and integration and support for employment now. We've required our provider executives to be trained in person-centered thinking and customized employment discovery and supported decision-making, because what we realized was a lot of our middle managers, our provider middle managers, had come to training. And some of our direct support professionals had, but we weren't getting the kind of top-down leadership we needed across providers. So we wanted to make sure, even if they didn't believe it, they understood what our values were and what our expectations were, and that that would be happening at the top level. We changed our requirements for daily progress notes and quarterly reports so that they include person-centered prompts. You know, we literally asked what worked and what didn't work about it. What did the person like about it and what didn't they like? So a different kind of progress note that hopefully is more meaningful to new staff who come in. We required that every single person in our day services have positive personal profiles, which are the vocational assessments, but also corresponding job search and community integration plans that are the foundation of their individual program plans. And for folks in our day programs, we then required individual schedules that detail hour by hour what activity the person is doing that help them either achieve their goals, explore their interest, or advance on the pathway to employment and community integration. So we're really trying to get at, if people are in a day program, what's happening that's meaningful in those programs? And then, you know, outside of the settings rule, you know, all of our clinical services now, for example, require that the therapy plan talks about functional outcomes based on what's important to and for the person, as reflected in their person-centered thinking and ISP tools. So that people are not just in physical therapy so they get a little more range of motion, but they're in physical therapy because they want to do something that their limitation now isn't allowing them to do. Try and make some of those things more meaningful for people. And what's exciting is we're now engaged with our Medicaid agency and our licensing agency to make those same changes to our ICF programs. That's a little bit tougher. We're getting there. Some of the federal regs for the ICFs are a little bit of a barrier, so figure I'll throw that out there while we're talking to ACL. And then finally, next slide. Laura talked about this. Becoming person-centered really required engagement at all levels. And so in addition to the work we did ourselves with our staff, with our community of practice of families, we worked with providers to become person-centered organizations. And we sponsored 4 of them to become person-centered organizations and many more to begin that journey. And, in addition to them really becoming more person-centered themselves and going through that journey, they were really able to give us critical feedback as they were entering and doing this work about what it was that was hard for them to be successful. And really, some of the best feedback we have gotten about where we're getting in the way is, coming from the providers who are trying to implement person-centered practices and are finding that one of our policies, some of our documentation requirements, some of our monitoring is not really reflecting the values. And so having that communication chain with the person-centered organizations has been really important to get an on-the-ground perspective of what's happening. The other thing we did was support advocates to become people planning together trainers. And I'll have Stephen come up and help me talk about what we're doing with self-advocates. All right, come up.
Oh, good.
Okay.
All right.
Good. All right, Stephen, why don't we start by having you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I'm an advocate, and I like going to the movies. I like to draw. I like to be in my own apartment. I have an apartment that I love to death. I like being around my girlfriends. And I like working at Safeway that I've been with for 10 years, and now it's going on 11 years. And I like working there, and I like being around my family, particularly during the holidays. I love the holidays. And I like being around a lot of my friends.
All right, so you're on the board of Project Action. Tell us a little about Project Action.
Project Action is a board about people with disability, teaching people how to be advocate for themselves and speaking up for themselves. Not let people tell you what you want. Tell them what you want, not what they want you to want. So, and we're trying to get a lot of young people to join us so they can be advocates too and speak up for themselves, be able to get the things they want in life. Like go to school, get training, get their own place, things like that.
Great. Next slide.
Yeah, okay.
So, Stephen, you talked about living in your apartment now, but for a long time, more than 50 years, you lived with your family.
Yep.
So what do you like best about being on your own?
Being able to go to the store when I want to.
What kind of supports do you get to help you?
I get support from RCM, and I have somebody to come in with me in the morning and in the evening. My situation is different than most people because I only need a little bit of support, but I still need support. But I'm glad that they give me a little bit, and we like to go out a lot, like to the movies, go to the Nats game. I love the Nats. The Redskin, love the Redskin.
Yeah. All right. So on the next slide, we have an example of that trajectory tool. Mm-hmm. So, Stephen, you're a strong self-advocate. You work, you have your own apartment, you serve on boards of, directors, you've been appointed by the mayor, mm-hmm. and you train lots of people on how to work with people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. What's helped make you so successful, do you think?
My mom propping me a lot, making sure I do the same thing that my sisters and brother does all the time. And being able to treat me the same way that she treat all my family members. That helped.
So your mom had high expectations for you?
Very high expectations. She didn't care if I had a disability. She made it sure that I learned just like everybody else.
Great. Now, you said you work at Safeway. What made you decide to work?
Well, I was in the mayor summer job program for ever since I was 14. So I've been working since I've been 14.
Awesome. All right. And
Mayor Barry.
This job program, right?
Yeah.
And then you travel all over the city by yourself. How did you learn how to do that?
My brother taught me how to train how to ride the bus on the subway. Well, they didn't have subway when I was doing it, but they still had the bus service. And now I know how to use the subway system and the bus service and mental access.
So your family took you out and showed you. And
Well,
helped you.
basically my brother, Michael Powe.
Awesome. Okay, next slide. So you currently get support, you said, from RCM of Washington. They're one of our organizations who went through that year-long person-centered organization process. What do you like about being with RCM that feels different than your other providers?
Well, we go out places and stuff, and now they got me doing the immersion leadership, which is just as good. That we talk about issues that affect people with disability, and try to put it on the website. We're working on our own website so people can watch and see what we're talking about.
Next slide. So one of the things that RCM does is they're supporting self-advocacy through their Emerging Leaders class. What else do you like about being with RCM?
Going to the Nats game like I like.
Yeah, so you've had an opportunity, you said, to do all sorts of cool things now.
Yeah, go to the Nats, go to the mall. Sometimes go to the mall with your friends, be able to protest without getting in trouble with the law.
So one of the things you told me about your staff now is, how do you get your staff?
Well, we go to how you get a stab. You go to a process. If you don't like the stab they give you the first time, you can always change what stab you want. So, when I met her, my first stab, she was okay. So now she's my staff for a while until I get a new one. But I'm hoping to keep her because she's do very well.
So with RCM, one thing that's different is you choose your staff.
Yeah, always.
Always.
Yeah, they don't give you nobody that you don't want. They give you somebody that you need, that you really need.
Another thing you told me is that your previous provider, your family never really felt comfortable with them. How's that different now?
Well, they feel a lot comfortable at RCM, besides giving them all them paperwork. But RCM is a very good program that you want somebody with a disability to be part of. They do a lot of self-advocate group for everybody. They make sure that we get the things that we need.
Yeah, you said one of the things about RCM to me was that they really recognize your relationship with your family, and they spend a lot of time.
They don't separate you from your family. They need the family input, just like family support service. That's the same as RCM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide. So one of the things that we're doing is a training called People Planning Together, where we're training self-advocates to become leaders and trainers in person-centered thinking and help other people lead their ISP meetings. Now, Stephen is not in our current class of trainers because he works.
Not yet.
Not yet,
Not
exactly.
yet, but I'm working on it.
We are going to make sure we schedule our next class around his work schedule.
Yeah.
But Stephen, do you lead your own ISP meetings now?
Yes, I do. I do now with my advocate. With the help of my advocate, I can lead my own ISP,
And
which is really good because for a while I didn't lead it, but I decided to do it for myself because I didn't believe that people was listening to what I'm saying. They was listening to what other people are saying. So now I lead my own ISP.
And now that you're leading your own ISP meetings, what are your goals like?
Well, I'm still living in my apartment. It was a
Right.
good thing. And my goal is to stay with Safeway for a while until I get my own business, and then I'll be able to do my own business and get a house, get married, have a car, things like that.
Awesome, all the good stuff we want.
Yeah.
So Project Action's motto is nothing about us without
Without
us.
us.
Yeah, why don't you talk about that a little?
I believe that I'm nothing without us because I believe that we all have something to give, to contribute into the community. Even though you have a disability, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything that nobody else could do. We could do whatever we want to do if we just believe in ourselves.
All right, next slide. So when we do People Planning Together training with self-advocates, we ask people, how do they know when they're in a good planning meeting? When do they feel good about a planning meeting? And some of the things people said is, I feel listened to, people respect me, people help me do what I want or take the time to listen, people respect my opinion.
And
Yeah, so what would you say, what is most
they
important?
let you speak up and they don't treat you like a baby.
Uh-huh. So what do you think is the most important thing people should know about working with people with disabilities?
We don't have any kind of diseases that's contagious, and they shouldn't feel that we're dangerous to them because we're not going to bother you as long as you don't bother us. We're real nice people. be like everybody.
Just like everyone else.
Yep.
All right, next slide. So, Stephen, you were recently featured on the Kojo Namdi show.
That was the fun.
Talking about how things have changed in D.C. to better support people with disabilities. What was it like to be on NPR?
Oh, that was real good. I like Coming Namdi. I watch him all the time on Channel 32, but I never thought in my whole lifetime that I would be on that channel. But he's a real nice person, and he's real nice in person.
So can we play a clip of your interview now? Is that okay?
Yep, that's okay.
We have one of those residents and self-advocates in the studio with us, Stephen Powe. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
We've been talking about how services and care for people living with disabilities have improved over the years in our city. In your case, after more than 50 years of living at home, you moved out a few years ago. You now live on your own. What does it feel like to be independent after all these years, and how does the city help you with that?
Well, the city helped me with my waiver that I have that helps me get my apartment for rent for less than $8 and something. And it's very helpful because I get to be out in the community. I get to socialize with a lot of friends. I get to go to the movies. I do all kinds of stuff, things that normal people take for granted. I get to ride the metro by myself and everything. I think that's real good with the waiver system, but I do think that the district need to do more research on people with disabilities so that we all get all kinds of benefits.
You have also become quite an advocate for people like yourself who are living with disabilities. Tell us a little bit about some of the advocacy work that you do.
Well, one is I'm in Fatality Review Board. That's when I can look. Well, if we have any problem with the Fatality Review Board, somebody from disability having a problem with the government, we can look it up and we can help people.
I know you've worked at Safeway.
Yep, I've been working there for 10 years.
Do you find yourself having to educate other people about what people with disabilities are capable of
Yeah,
doing?
particularly with the boss. I think the boss don't think that we can do more than what he can do. I think the boss think that we should just be doing mopping floors and everything.
Well, in a lot of cases, you are, in some people would say you're a legacy employee at Safeway because it's my understanding that your father had a whole career at Safeway.
No, my father used to work for Giant, but the same thing, I'm like second generation. So if he can do it in Giant, I can do management work at Safeway.
Stephen Powe, tell us a little bit about how it felt for, after being at home for 50 years, and now that you're on your own, being able to do things on your own. What was it that inspired you to decide to be an advocate for other people living with disabilities?
Well, I went to Kennedy Institute, my old school, and they was talking about Project Action. And first I got a little nervous about it, but then I decided to join it for a while. And then when I started joining, I got promoted to vice president, and now I love it ever since.
Awesome. We just needed your clip. All right. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
Not right now.
I'm sure you'll have some in the Q&A.
Yeah, I sure will.
All right.